Every single country on earth owes money to someone. Every single one. Even the richest nations, the most powerful economies, the ones printing the money itself, they are drowning in debt they can never repay. And here is the part that should terrify you. This is not an accident. Right now, global debt stands at over $300 trillion. That is not a typo, 300 trillion. To put that in perspective, that is nearly 3 times the entire economic output of every country on the planet combined. The United States alone carries more than 36 trillion in national debt, and it grows by roughly $1 trillion every 100 days. Japan owes more than twice its annual GDP. China, despite being called an economic superpower, is buried under corporate and government debt that economists warn could trigger the next global crisis. But here is what nobody talks about. This system was designed this way. To understand why every nation is trapped, we need to go back to August 15, 1971. That is the day President Richard Nixon walked into a television studio and made an announcement that would quietly reshape the entire global economy. He ended the gold standard. Before that moment, every dollar was theoretically backed by gold sitting in Fort Knox. If you had a dollar, you could, in theory, exchange it for a fixed amount of gold. It created a natural limit. You could not print infinite money because you only had so much gold. But Nixon cut that cord. Suddenly, money was no longer tied to anything tangible. It became what economists call fiat currency, money backed only by trust, by a government promise. And once that happened, something extraordinary occurred. Governments realized they could borrow without immediate consequences. Here is how the trap works. Modern governments do not print money to pay for things. They borrow it by issuing bonds. A bond is essentially an IOU. The government says, "Lend us money now, and we will pay you back later with interest." Investors, other countries, pension funds, even regular people buy these bonds because they are considered safe. But here is the key. Paying back those bonds requires money the government often does not have. So what do? They issue more bonds to pay off the old ones. According to financial historian Niall Ferguson, this creates a debt spiral. Governments are not paying off debt. They are refinancing it indefinitely, kicking the can down the road. And every time they do, the debt grows larger. The interest payments alone on U.S. debt now exceed what the country spends on defense. Think about that for a second. America spends more money just paying interest on old debt than it does on its entire military. But why do not countries just stop borrowing? Because the entire modern economy is built on growth, endless growth. Governments promise their citizens better roads, healthcare, education, defense, social programs. To deliver those promises without raising taxes to unbearable levels, they borrow. And voters reward politicians who spend, not the ones who cut. According to economist Thomas Piketty, democracies structurally favor short-term spending over long-term fiscal discipline because election cycles demand visible results. A politician who borrows to build a new highway gets re-elected. The one who pays down debt gets voted out for austerity. So borrowing becomes the only politically viable option. But there is something even darker happening beneath the surface. Central banks, the institutions that control money supply, have been buying government debt themselves. After the 2008 financial crisis, the Federal Reserve began a program called quantitative easing. Essentially, the Fed created new money out of thin air and used it to buy government bonds. Japan has been doing this for decades. The European Central Bank followed suit. What does this mean? It means governments are borrowing money from institutions that simply invent the money to lend. It is a system eating itself. Now here is the twist that almost nobody sees coming. This is not a bug in the system. It is the system. According to economic anthropologist David Graeber, debt has been used as a tool of control for thousands of years. Ancient kings would lend to farmers, and when the farmers could not pay, the king owned their land. Modern governments and central banks are playing the same game, but on a global scale. When a country goes into unsustainable debt, it loses sovereignty. Look at Greece in 2010. The country borrowed so much it could no longer pay its bills. The European Union and International Monetary Fund stepped in, but the bailout came with conditions. Greece had to cut pensions, slash public services, sell national assets. The Greek people voted against austerity, but it did not matter. The creditors were in control. Argentina, Lebanon, Sri Lanka, the pattern repeats. A country borrows, cannot repay, and suddenly external powers are dictating domestic policy. Debt becomes leverage, and leverage becomes control. But belief is fragile. In Weimar Germany after World War I, the government printed money to pay its debts, and the currency became so worthless people used it as wallpaper. In Zimbabwe in the 2000s, hyperinflation got so bad, the country issued a $100 trillion bill that could not buy a loaf of bread. These are extreme examples, but they reveal a truth. All fiat currency systems depend on trust, and trust can evaporate overnight. Right now, global trust is being tested. Central banks raised interest rates to fight inflation, which makes old debt more expensive to refinance. Countries that borrowed when rates were low are now facing payments they cannot afford. According to the World Bank, over 60% of low-income countries are now in or near debt distress. And it is not just poor countries. The UK, Italy, and France are all facing debt to GDP ratios that economists once considered unsustainable. You cannot borrow infinitely without consequences, and those consequences are already showing up. Inflation, wealth inequality, political instability. These are not separate issues. They are symptoms of a debt-based economy that has reached its breaking point. And the scariest part, most people do not even realize they are living inside the trap. They see rising prices, stagnant wages, crumbling infrastructure, and they blame politicians or corporations or each other. But the real problem is deeper. It is a monetary system designed to create perpetual debt. And in that system, everyone, from individual citizens to entire nations, becomes a debtor. So here is the question nobody wants to ask. If every country is in debt, who exactly do we all owe? And what happens when they come to collect?